This is Ralph Brandt from the Fireside. I'm going to talk a little bit about some questions that were asked on a social media forum concerning nuclear energy and some of the prospects of what would happen if a nuclear plant were bombed. I know we all want to think that that can never happen, and I sure hope it does. But I think we need to talk about things realistically. What really does happen? I'm going to begin that by saying a couple of things. First, the nuclear plant accident at Chernobyl was totally eviscerated by several things. One of the first was experimenting with a reactor with less than the A team there. That's what got them into trouble. The second thing was the reactor is not built in a containment building like nearly all reactors in the United States. For example, the 3 Mile Island reactors were built in containment buildings that were adequate to take an impact of a 747 type aircraft. Now, whether it was or was not capable of withstanding that may be open to question, but the goal was for it to withstand a serious impact. I joked that the Chernobyl reactor was in a Morton building. It's not true, but it was in a metal shed type building. When something went wrong, there was nothing to contain it. The building melted away with the heat. It was blown away by the explosion. A more robust building would probably have saved a lot of the contamination. Here in southeastern Pennsylvania, we have 2 reactors. Now, the first thing somebody's going to say is, oh, the one at TMI is shut down. Right. Going to talk about that later. The other one is at Peach Bottom, and it's one of the oldest reactor sites in the United States. I just checked, and 2 of its 5 reactors are still operating. TMI Unit 2 is the one I'd like to talk about a little bit. TMI Unit 2 went online, first producing commercial power near midnight on December the 31st, 1978, and the accident occurred less than 3 months later on March 29th, 1979. One of the things that few recognize is that there was a hurry-up to get that reactor to run commercial power online before midnight on December 31st, 1978, to get it into the rate base. If that had not happened until a couple of hours later, the reactor would not have been able to be included in the rate base for a year. There are some discrepancies on exact items that happened there, but it shut down because the cooling water line coming from the river was clogged. Essentially, why is contested, but the best information was someone was trying to clean a partial clog and made it worse. All too often, attempts to fix something go wrong because they are not as well thought out as they should be. Without cooling water, the reactor did exactly the right thing. Without cooling water, the reactor scrammed. That is, the cadmium control rods that absorb neutrons were automatically released into the reactor, slowing, then stopping the reaction. However, there was a lot of residual heat in that reactor, and there was still some chain reaction going on. That creates more residual heat. Without regular water flow, the temperature increased. I think normal was around 600 degrees. Water stays liquid at high temperatures under pressure. TMI is called a pressure water reactor for that reason. With the circulation off, the reactor automatically went into emergency core cooling. But this dumps a lot of water into the tank, and it must be decontaminated, which is costly. The operators there on site, under management direction, were instructed to cut ECC as soon as possible to reduce the cost of cleaning up that water. They did it too soon, and the accident was in progress. Worse, they opened a valve that dumped water out of the reactor into the containment building basement, contaminating it and allowing the core to overheat. The cladding on some of the fuel broke open, causing more contamination. The alarms were running about a half an hour behind because the printer was a slow one. In fact, it was an IBM 3284, which prints at about 44 characters a second. The operators had no idea what they were doing because the alarms were so far behind. The actions they took did not seem to have effect, and they assumed that they had done the wrong thing and started doing other things. The board showing the piping was a bad design, set up like a steam power plant, not a nuke, and it was confusing. This was dictated by the MedEd management when the plant was being constructed. In spite of all that went wrong, and a lot did, very little radiation was released. There are conspiracy theories, but no evidence of any of them are valid. Fortunately, TMI did not escalate to even a fraction of what Chernobyl did. Imagine this area not being habitable for 2,500 years. At least an area a few miles around the reactor. Now let's go on to another subject. If the TMI reactor was bombed, this is the long answer, but I hope it helps someone. A person in one of my social media contacts was concerned about the bombing of TMI. What would happen if it were bombed? Peach Bottom, which everyone ignores, is similar, but is slightly more critical because it is running and very hot in the temperature state. They are to the south, so all of the directions that I talk about here would be reversed. In other words, if I talk about north, it would be south. If the TMI reactor was bombed, it would be anything from a no problem to a complete disaster. First, the TMI reactor is shut down, not operating. Most think that is good. I'm going to talk later about how this could impact other things, but this shutdown could in some day cause us rolling blackouts and will contradictory to the reasons for the shutdown, with current increases in natural gas prices for electrical generation. This will cause increases in electrical bills. The pressure to close the coal-burning Brunner Island will be another possible price increase. If TMI were bombed, it would depend on at least 100 things. If the reactor building was not breached and the cooling was not stopped, yes, the spent fuel does create some heat. There is a lot of it there, and I'm not aware that the reactor fuel has been moved to on-site storage that does still need some cooling, but can wait hours, maybe days. The lack of cooling poses some risk, but based on the Fukushima 5 reactor incident, the reactor buildings, not anywhere near as sturdy as the TMI containment, which was designed to take a 747 impact without breach. Getting up emergency cooling in days prevented releases from several of the Fukushima reactors. Several of the others that were breached or cooling was not brought up did result in significant releases. I feel pretty sure that it would take a significant bomb to create a breach of both the containment and fracture something that would cause a release. Remember, you have to cause damage inside as well as breaching the containment. If you study the 1979 accident at TMI, had the operators dropped dead when the reactor shut down, there would have been no accident, and following management directives did the damage. Now let's suppose we have a release. The 10-mile zone you hear about is a concoction of idiocy. Radiation goes where it goes. There are many issues here, but the first, it is simply driven by the wind. If you are within 10 degrees of downwind, it is time to get out. Maybe. I might get out no matter what if I was within 5 miles and go further away simply to give me more time to react to wind changes. If I was close to downwind, let's say I am south and the wind is blowing south, I would want to get out of the south-southwest to south-southeast area. Since I am nearly south, personally, I would head for relatives living in the Carlisle area about 95 degrees off the path. I know evacuation routes, and no, I would not follow them. I would avoid them. I know lots of back roads in that direction. If you don't know the Lattimore and Coffeetown roads, don't try it. You will get lost. GPS may not work if we are under attack. Do you happen to carry a map in your car? The evac routes will become parking lots. Keep your gas tank above half full. Do not attempt an evac with it if you have a quarter of a tank. You will be stuck along the road out of gas with no possibility of getting any. Learn this watching Florida hurricane evacs. If the wind was southwest, I might be headed for the Lancaster area, except for one little problem. If I got to Route 30 and it was backed up, which is almost certain, I would head south, then west, say towards Hanover and Frederick, avoiding Route 30 as soon as I got across. As for the house, if they tell you to shelter in place, stay there unless you feel you can really get out safely. Close outside venting. Most recommend shutting off HVAC. I will shut off the AC, but since my house is outside vented for combustion air, I will run it sparingly for heat if absolutely necessary to prevent me from freezing. One comment here. I suggest 2 rolls of duct tape or painter's tape and some plastic sheeting is good to have around. Tape off whatever you can that leaks air. Finding those and closing them helps also with HVAC costs. I would put one around door and window closures. Do not go out. If you do for some reason, you will bring contamination inside if there are particles in the plume. It will not all be a gas. I would probably leave as early as possible to evac unless I was to stay to support emergency operations. I would then be carrying a direct reading dosimeter. That's a little device that you can look at and see how much radiation you've absorbed. I have one and I have the device to reset it. In this kind of situation, I follow the airline flight attendant rule on when they evacuate. It goes, when the water is too deep, the fire gets too hot, or the smoke gets too thick to help others, you leave. My additional one, when the area gets too radioactive. Remember, I am 78. I am not concerned about a 20-year cancer risks, as I would expect 30-year-olds to be. I would be more likely to stay in place and replace them in any role I can. Another issue that comes up frequently is the KI tablets, that is, potassium iodide. These only protect against future thyroid cancer about 15 years out. They do not protect you from any other radiation. They are not a panacea. They were issued, I believe, primarily as an emotional support thing during the TMI accident, and they have been distributed since. They have a value, yes, but that value is quite limited. If the plant gets bombed, do you have any idea now better what to do to protect yourself and your family? If you do, this has been a successful YouTube broadcast. Thank you. This is Ralph Brandt from the Fireside.